Is there anything more comforting than a perfect, bubbly, cheesy, homemade lasagna? The kind with a rich, meaty tomato sauce that simmers all day long, a creamy ricotta, and pasta that just melts in your mouth. There's no need to buy a frozen lasagna from the store. It's a simple recipe and it turns out so much better when you make it at home. You can even double or triple the recipe for some freezer meals. I guarantee your family will love this classic Italian dish. Don't be intimidated by the various components. Let me show you how to make this recipe step by step. The first thing we will start with is making the meat sauce. It's important to get started on the sauce earlier in the day because the longer it has to simmer on the stove, the better it will taste. I will start by cutting up the vegetables that we will need for this bolognese sauce. So here I have an onion and a clove of garlic. I will also chop up some carrots. I want to dice these quite finely. I want to make sure that there's no huge chunks. They are to add flavor to the sauce. We're not supposed to have a huge bite full of onion or carrot or garlic. If I was making just a tomato sauce, I would have added celery, but because I'm making a bolognese, I don't normally add celery to my bolognese. But if you want to, feel free. It's whatever your family likes best. Tomatoes are very acidic, so you want to add a sweet component to this sauce to counter the acidity. That's why I'm adding 2 carrots here. The first step to making this sauce will be to brown the meat. So here I'm adding some olive oil to the bottom of my preheated Dutch oven. And I normally always make sauces in a Dutch oven. It just heats evenly. It doesn't burn anything at the bottom. And it really helps to develop a delicious flavor. So I put in the meat. Here I'm using ground beef. And I added some coarse salt. Now I'm just going to spread the ground beef out at the bottom of the pan, and I'm sort of going to let it sit there and cook. I'm not actually going to touch it for a while because I want it to brown. So you saw in the image there, I had some browned meat, and that was once I started to flip it. I will break it up with a spatula after into tiny little chunks, but those browned bits are really delicious, and they really enhance the flavor of the sauce. Once the meat is browned, I will add the onion and the carrots. I want to make sure to sear these nicely, and that will add a lot of flavor. Once those have cooked, I'm going to make a little well in the pan, or in the pot I should say, and I'll add some oil and some garlic. Now you only want to cook garlic for about 30 seconds until you smell it. So it's an aromatic, it has a really strong smell. As soon as you smell it, you want to sort of immerse it with everything else in the pan and then add the next component so that it doesn't overcook. The next step is to add tomato paste. Tomato paste is a vital component because it will really enhance the sweetness. So I always add tomato paste to the meat and to the vegetables that I add at the beginning because it'll caramelize on the sides of the pan and really, really help bring out the sweetness of the sauce. The tomato paste now has become sort of caramelized on the sides and the bottom of the pot. So I use some wine to deglaze the pan. I also turned up the temperature a little bit. So normally I had it a bit lower than medium, but I turned it up once I added the wine in, and that way it allowed me to burn out the alcohol. I let the wine reduce by about half, and then I added the tomato sauce. These are San Marzano tomatoes that I canned earlier in the summer, and they're a very sweet and delicious sauce. I won't be adding any sugar to my sauce because I know that these tomatoes are very sweet and are not super acidic. But if you're using a different type of tomato, you could either add more carrots just to increase the sweetness or add a pinch of sugar. I would add it in a small quantity. You don't want to add too much of it. You don't want it to mask the flavor of the sauce itself. But sometimes you just need that to balance the acidity. I just added some water to my jars to clean them out and put it into the pot. I'm going to turn the temperature up just a tad so that it can come to a simmer, and then I will reduce it again. Can't forget to add a good amount of salt and dried oregano. You should be trying this sauce throughout the day and adjusting the seasoning as needed. Once it comes up to temperature, just let it simmer and leave it there on the stove. The next step is to make the cheesy component to the lasagna. So the main component here will be the ricotta cheese. Now, I make ricotta cheese from scratch, but don't feel like you have to. I know that it may be a daunting task just to make this lasagna, so going a step further and making your own cheese doesn't need to be a necessity here. But if you want to, I will put a link below in the description on how to make your own ricotta from scratch. I made a video on that previously. Here I'm just shredding up all the mozzarella cheese. So I have this hard mozzarella cheese, and it's nothing special. It's just a basic cheese that I found on sale at the grocery store. I will grate up a good portion of it because I am making 2 full lasagnas, and then I will also make sort of a half lasagna that I'll give to my kids one day when maybe my husband and I are eating something that isn't particularly suitable for kids. To speed up the process, I actually use my food processor to grate this cheese, but the baby was sleeping at this point, so I didn't want to make any noise and wake her up. That would slow down my progress here, so instead I just did it all by hand. Once you have all the cheese grated, you can add it to a large bowl and make sure to keep some mozzarella on the side to put on top of the lasagna so that it forms that nice cheesy browned crust. Then you add the ricotta. I decided not to use all my ricotta because I wanted to make a cake with some of it later. And I had a lot of it, so I had plenty to go around for my lasagnas. The next ingredient I will add is some freshly grated nutmeg. This was a little special trick that my husband's nonna would use. My husband's family always adds some freshly grated nutmeg, and I truly believe that it really enhances the flavor of the cheese components. You could use ground nutmeg too if is all you have on hand, but I do recommend using freshly grated. It smells so good and it just really has a different flavor than the ground stuff. After that, we will be adding 3 eggs to this cheese mixture. Now, the eggs will really help to bulk this up, and they're going to add some protein to this dish too, but they really add a creaminess to this texture, and they are a vital component, so do not forget the eggs. I know some recipes call for less eggs, but honestly, I think the more you have, the better it is. I'll quickly mix these ingredients together. I'm not doing anything special. I'm just using a fork to, get it all mixed in and trying to do it as quick as possible. I usually make this mixture in advance, just like the sauce, and I'll just let it sit in the fridge until I'm ready to use it. So now that the sauce has been simmering on the stove for the majority of the day, and it's getting closer to dinner time, so I will now build the lasagna. I actually noticed that I forgot to add some Parmesan cheese to the cheese component. So I'm there grating some Parmesan cheese real quickly into the cheese bowl, and I will mix that in as well. Want to make sure to have that because Parmesan adds a nice saltiness to it. So the ricotta and the eggs are very creamy and they're rich, but you want a bit more salt in this too. So the Parmesan will really help balance that out. Now on to building the lasagna. I always start with a layer of sauce. I'm using uncooked noodles, so I'm going to have a lot of liquid so that these noodles will cook because they will absorb a lot of the liquid as they cook. That's just what happens in general with pasta noodles. And I want to make sure that my lasagna does not become dry. I know at the grocery store, they often have noodles that have little crinkles on the sides. I prefer to use these flat noodles. I just find that they're a lot easier to work with, and I find they taste a lot better. They also cook a lot more evenly, and they're not quite as thick. So once I have the bottom layer of noodles down, I will put a layer of sauce. I'll do this for both portions. I'm making 2 big portions here. I want to double my recipe to make my life easier in the future. Anything that can reduce the amount of cooking I have to do on a busy day with my family is something that I will heavily appreciate. I will now add the cheese mixture on top. So it's somewhat messy to do sometimes, but I just try to smooth it out on top of the sauce layer. One of my daughters does not like cheese, so I'll leave a portion of the lasagna without cheese. That way I can give her a slice from that corner. I never actually grew up eating homemade lasagna. My mom would buy the frozen lasagnas. She was a busy working mom, and sometimes that was just the easiest thing. My sister and I never really complained about eating that lasagna because we didn't know any better or any different. Once I had tried homemade lasagna and started eating it more regularly, I could never go back to store-bought lasagna. I will just continue now with this layering process, and I will be doing 3 layers. So I go with sauce, then cheese, then lasagna noodles. Now, I totally forgot that my husband had actually picked up some fresh mozzarella. So this is a much softer mozzarella. It's not something that I grate, it's more cheese that I cut. I use this often when we make pizzas in the pizza oven outside in the summer, but it's delicious in mozzarella. I also like it on my chicken parmesan, and it just has such a creamy texture and cheesy taste, and it's just far superior than the mozzarella bar cheese that I was using before. So I really want to make sure that I get this in the lasagna. And I'm not going to put this on top. It's not a cheese that you would want to sprinkle on top. It's one you would want to be more melted in the middle of the lasagna. So if you can find this at the grocery store and buy it, put it in your lasagna, it will make it so much better. I was able to get most of this done without my kids disrupting me, but of course someone's coming to join me in the kitchen, and that's okay. It always turns into a learning process for them, and they actually tend to appreciate the food a lot more when they feel like they're involved or, talking to me and learning from the actual method that I'm using. There's always somewhat of a balance of wanting my kids to be involved and learn, and then also wanting to get the job done in a timely fashion. But in reality, the real clock I'm working against is my baby's nap schedule. And if she wakes up, then that will hinder my progress a lot more. So I'm thankful that she stayed asleep while I made these lasagnas, and I will be able to tend to her when she gets up. I'm putting the next layer of lasagna pasta, and I like to put them going different directions for each layer. So whereas I would put them horizontally in the first layer, I'll put them vertically in the second layer. And I find this helps them intertwine. And so the lasagna doesn't just sort of slip off of each other, or the layers don't slip away when I go and serve it. And they really stay nicely intertwined and hold together well. I'm going to speed up the process here, and you see me just putting another layer of the cheese down, and then I will add the soft cheese, the fresh mozzarella. If you like to have an extra cheesy lasagna, feel free to add more. If you're not quite as fond of ricotta and you want to have just a lasagna with mozzarella, then do that. It's really up to you and your family's preferences. Now I'm going to top it with the last layer of lasagna sheets, and then I will put some mozzarella on top. My fondest memories of eating lasagna probably come from my husband's nonna and how around the holidays the family would get together and make fresh lasagna. Now, I remember there were several occasions where they made fresh pasta, and really that would be taking it up a notch. And I do hope to be able to produce my own lasagnas with fresh pasta in the near future. I have made pasta from scratch before, but it is very time consuming, and with all my young kids around, it becomes very difficult because it's a very fragile process. It's easy to break those pasta sheets. When I go to cook this, I may even add some more water depending on how much liquid I have in the pan. I will also put some tinfoil on top and cover it because I don't want it to dry out too quickly. And I also don't want the top to get too browned. For the portion that I freeze, I normally add about half a cup of water when I go to cook it. That gives the noodles plenty of moisture to absorb. Finally, once I have topped my lasagnas with cheese, I really like to add some fresh basil. When the basil sits on top of the cheese and it's cooked in the oven, I don't know what it is, but it just tastes delicious afterwards. It's nice and crisp and salty, and I really think it enhances the overall flavor. The greenness also makes it look a lot nicer, but to be honest, I have to take them off of my kids' slices because they do not like looking at the basil or knowing that it's there. So I actually had enough ingredients left over to make a quick lasagna here. I just put pulled it together in a smaller dish. And I'll use this one day when my husband and I want to have some sort of spicy dinner or something, that isn't really kid friendly. And that way my kids will still have a healthy meal that they can eat. Here's the final product, and I can guarantee that it was absolutely delicious. I hope you give it a try at home and enjoy.